Hello students, I hope you all doing well. So for today we're going to talk about the differences between active voice and passive voice. Okay, so let's get started. So the first thing you would have to know is this. When we are dealing or when we are talking about active and passive voice, we're always talking about the verbs or the verb in the sentence. Okay, so the voice of a verb describes the relationship with the subject. We will going to explain this in just a minute. So, what is important now is this. The verb can be in the active and passive voice. So the verb is always changeable. Okay? It is always changeable. You can put it in a active voice or you can put it in a passive voice. So let's find out what is active voice. What do we mean by active voice? So an active voice happens when the subject is performing the action, or we can say happens when the subject is performing an action, any kind of action. It doesn't matter. Okay? So here in active voice, we have the subject. We always have the subject at the beginning of the sentence, just like this sentence below. Okay? Look at this example. Mary hit the ball. Okay? So, whenever we have a subject at the beginning, be sure that we are dealing with a active voice, always. Okay? Good. And we can name a different thing for subject, which is doer. We can also say doer. Doer means the exact thing. Doer is someone who's doing an action or performing an action. Instead of subject, you can whether say subject or doer, okay? So the subject is the doer, okay? The subject does something. The subject does an action, okay? The doer is always the subject, is again the subject, okay? So the doer is again doing an action, okay? So, as we said, always at the beginning we have a subject, okay? And then the verb, which is hit, and then the ball, okay? So, if we asked a question, if we said, what did Mary do? Okay, because we said the subject is performing the action. Can you tell me where is the action here? What did Mary do? Excellent. Mary did something, right? Mary hit the ball. So hit the ball is the action, right? The subject did something, right? Mary is the doer. Mary is the subject of this sentence, okay? So whenever you see a subject at the beginning of a sentence, be sure that we are dealing with a active voice. So this is active voice. You always have a subject at the beginning of a sentence, which is performing an action, okay? Good. So a very important note here to consider is the only difference between active voice and passive voice. So let's find out what is the difference. So first, for active voice, when the subject, as we said, when the subject is the doer of the action, the verb is in the active voice. Okay? When the subject is doing something, is doing an action, okay, then the verb is always in the active voice. Okay? But when the subject is the receiver of the action, the verb is in the passive voice. Okay? So here, note this. The subject here, as we talked about in the active voice, the subject is always at the beginning for the active voice. But for the passive voice, the subject will be found at the end of the sentence. Okay? So this is very easy. Just remember this. The subject, when the subject came at the beginning of the sentence, be sure that it is an active voice. When the subject comes at the end of the sentence, it isn't active voice. It is a passive voice. Okay? Look at this. Active voice. This is the formula of active voice. And here also we have the formula for passive voice. So first of all, let's talk about the formula of the active voice. As we said, the subject doing an action, which is the doer, okay? Doer of the action, subject of the action, it is always someone, okay? So here, as you can see, Rick is the name of a person, so we have the subject at the beginning of the sentence, okay? And then what do we have? A verb, okay? The verb is cleaned. And then what do we have? We have an object which is receiving the action which was done by the subject, okay? So if we said, who cleaned the garden? Rick cleaned the garden, right? So Rick took an action to clean the garden. Okay? So again, the garden is receiving the action. Okay? Let me say it again. The garden is receiving the action which was done by the subject. Okay? So Rick cleaned the garden. Subject, verb, and the receiver of the action, or the receiver of the verb. Okay? Cleaned. This is the action. Rick cleaned the garden. Okay? So this is for active voice. For passive voice, this is the formula. It's a little bit longer, but it is easier. It's easy. So let's find out. As I said before, when we are talking about passive voice, always the subject comes at the end of the sentence, okay, for passive voice. I'm not talking about active voice, okay? So always for the passive voice, remember this. The subject always comes at the beginning of the sentence. At the end of the sentence, okay? So let's talk about it. Subject, which is the receiver. What reminds you? What things you can remember about receiver? Where did you see this word? Excellent. You saw it here. As I said, listen. Object receiving the action. So here, basically or obviously, the garden, as I said, is the receiver of the action, right? So if you want to convert, or if you want to change this sentence into a passive voice, the first thing you would need to do is this. You will bring the receiver to the beginning of the sentence, okay? The first thing is done, okay? You will bring the receiver to the beginning of the sentence. And then you have be, which is was and were, okay? So, listen. Depend on the tense of the sentence, you will choose one of these two, was or were, singular, plural, okay? Or we have for present tense, of course, you will know it is. For present tense, is. For past tense, was and were, okay? So here, look at this. Rick cleaned the garden. What is the tense of the sentence? You see the ZD, right? So it is definitely for past, okay? And Rick is just one person, right? It is singular. So you have to choose was instead of were, because were is for plural, was is for singular. Okay? So, as we said, cleaned is in the past, the tense of the sentence is in the past, and also ed, right? So again, we will bring the receiver of the action to the beginning and then add one of these two, was, because of the subject, which is singular, and then you will have to choose the third form of verbs, past participle. Okay? Here we have clean, cleaned. It remains the same. And then when you also did this, you will have by plus the doer of the action. As I said, students, you will bring the subject to the end of the sentence, and after it you will add by. Okay? The garden was cleaned by Rick. Okay? Look at this example. Passive voice. The doer, which is the subject, is found at the end of the sentence, as we discussed. Another example. Mandy gave me this book. Okay? We all know Mandy is the subject, gave is the verb, and this book, or we can say just book, is the receiver of the action, right? Book is the receiver of the action, which was done by the subject. Okay? Always move back two steps back, okay? Always 2 steps back. The receiver, which is book, received the action which was performed by the subject. Okay? So if we want to change this active voice into a passive voice, because as we said, how can you tell this is an active voice? By finding the subject at the beginning of the sentence. Okay? Good. So how can we change this active voice into a passive voice? The first thing, very good, you will bring the receiver to the beginning of the sentence, and then remember, be, was, were, is book singular or plural? It is, of course, singular. This book, it is one book. So we have to choose a singular verb, which is was. And why it is in the past? Because we have the verb in past. The tense of the sentence is in the past. Gave me, right? So singular, and also it is in the past. So we have to choose was, right? And then what did we do? Excellent. We chose the third form of the verb give, gave, given. The third form of the verb, right? Given. And then by Mandy. That easy. This book was given by Mandy. A passive voice. Another example. Harry ate a sandwich this morning. Harry is the subject, right? Which is also the doer. Remember, the doer, the subject, the doer. Where is the verb? Good, it is ate. And where is the object? The receiver, as we said. It is sandwich. Good. The receiver, sandwich, is the receiver of the action, and the action is performed by a subject. Okay? Again and again and again. So there you go. We have a active voice. Why? Because we have the subject at the beginning of the sentence. Okay? So, a homework for you. It is in 2 parts, okay? 2 questions. The first question, just identify, just underline the subject, verb, and the receiver of the sentences, of these 2 sentences, okay? Just identify the subject, which is the doer, remember, the verb, and the receiver. Underline them. The second part of the second question is this. Change the active voice into passive voice. Okay? You will change the active voice into passive voice. So basically these two sentences are active voice. You will change them into passive voice. Okay? So we're done for today. Do your homework and stay safe.